I got lost in the woods and encountered something I'll never forget. It all started as a simple hiking trip, one that I had done countless times before. The woods were my sanctuary, peaceful, quiet, and calming. I had a trail in mind, but when I saw a fork in the path, curiosity got the best of me. I had hiked in these woods many times, and I felt confident that a quick detour wouldn't hurt. After all, a change of scenery was always refreshing, right? At first, everything seemed perfect. The rustling leaves, the scent of pine, the occasional bird call in the distance. Everything felt alive, but in a comforting way. I walked for what felt like hours, completely immersed in the beauty around me. But as I ventured deeper into the forest, the landscape started to change. The familiar trails I knew so well slowly vanished, replaced by dense thickets and unfamiliar terrain. I couldn't see any markers, no obvious signs of a path to follow. I stopped for a moment, trying to get my bearings. The woods had an uncanny way of making time feel distorted. The sun was still shining, but the trees overhead blocked out enough light to make it hard to tell the time. I checked my phone, only to realize there was no service. My heart sank. I was lost, and I had no idea how to get back. The wind picked up, sending shivers down my spine. The forest was no longer welcoming. It was overwhelming. The silence was the most unnerving part. The usual sounds of nature, the birds, the wind, the occasional animal rustling through the leaves, had stopped. It felt as if the woods themselves were holding their breath, watching me. I tried retracing my steps, but every direction looked the same. The trees stood tall and silent, like silent witnesses to my panic. I tried to calm myself, telling myself I just needed to stop and think. But no matter how many times I retraced my steps, or how carefully I scanned the surroundings, nothing looked familiar. I was well and truly lost. My mind raced through different scenarios. Should I stay put? Should I keep walking? I didn't want to waste energy or risk going deeper into the woods, but staying put meant waiting for something I wasn't sure would ever come. Rescue. I knew the best course of action was to find a way out, but the more I walked, the more disorienting the forest became. It felt like the woods were shifting, changing, as though they had a will of their own. The trees seemed to lean in closer, and the shadows grew longer. Panic gripped me, and I picked up the pace, hoping to find some sign of civilization. But all I saw were endless trees stretching far into the horizon. Then, suddenly, in the distance, I noticed something that made my heart stop. A faint, eerie glow flickered through the trees. What could it be? A campfire? A light from a house? My instincts told me to avoid it, but I couldn't resist the pull. I began walking toward the light, hoping it would lead me out of the woods. The glow in the distance was strange, not like any campfire I'd seen before. It was faint, almost as if it were barely clinging to life, but it beckoned me forward. I tried to shake off the unease that crept into my chest, telling myself that it was just another hiker, or perhaps someone else who had gotten lost, just like me. But the more I walked, the more disconcerting it became. The light was flickering in odd patterns, casting strange shadows that didn't quite match the natural surroundings. I quickened my pace, desperate for something, anything, that could guide me back to safety. The woods felt darker now, and the breeze, once gentle, had turned cold. My clothes didn't seem to offer any protection from the sudden chill that surrounded me. My heart pounded in my chest as I moved closer to the source of the glow. The air felt heavier, thick with an odd electric tension. As I got closer, I began to see shapes, faint silhouettes of trees that looked oddly twisted, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The trees around me were no longer the same. They had become unnaturally tall, their trunks gnarled and warped, like something from a nightmare. I stopped dead in my tracks, the light now just a few feet away. It wasn't a campfire or a lantern, as I had imagined. It was a soft, glowing orb, hovering a few inches above the ground. The light seemed to pulse slowly, rhythmically, almost as if it had a heartbeat of its own. I took a cautious step forward, my breath caught in my throat. There was no way this was natural. No wind, no human hand could produce something like this. I felt an overwhelming urge to reach out, but my body froze. Something wasn't right. The orb seemed to call to me, pulling me closer, and yet every instinct told me to turn around, to run back in the opposite direction. I fought against it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The orb emitted a soft hum, and suddenly, the forest felt even more silent than before. The silence was deafening. I took another step closer, this time without thinking. As I did, the orb flickered and shifted, moving just out of my reach. Panic surged through me. I couldn't afford to get any closer, but before I could turn around, the ground beneath me seemed to shift. It was as if the earth itself was alive, moving in ways I couldn't comprehend. The once stable forest floor seemed to ripple, and I stumbled back in shock. Just as quickly as the strange movement had started, everything stopped. The orb hovered there, waiting. My heart raced, and for a moment I wasn't sure what to do. But then something made me look behind me. The trees, those twisted, unnatural trees, had changed again. There was no longer a clear path ahead, only a wall of dense, dark branches that seemed to close in around me. I realized, with a chill running down my spine, that I was trapped. The forest had shifted once again, but this time it wasn't letting me go. Panic rose in my chest as I tried to backtrack, but the ground beneath my feet seemed to resist me. The forest had become a maze of darkened trees, their branches twisted in unnatural angles, blocking any possible path. I felt the oppressive silence close in around me, almost suffocating. The orb was still there, glowing faintly, but now it wasn't the only thing in the darkness. The shadows around me seemed to stretch and shift, as if they were alive, moving with a mind of their own. I could feel eyes on me, dozens of eyes. The trees, the ground, the air itself felt like it was watching, waiting for me to make a mistake. The quiet was unbearable, but then, just as I was about to take another step, I heard something. It was soft at first, like a whisper in the wind, too faint to understand. I froze. The sound came again, clearer this time, like a voice calling my name. I spun around, looking for the source, but saw nothing. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. There was no response, just the eerie silence and the oppressive feeling that I was being watched. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my nerves, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was close. The shadows seemed to move again, but this time, I saw something. Figures, shapes that were almost human, but not quite, shifted within the dark. They were like silhouettes, their features indistinct, but they were unmistakably there. The whispering grew louder, but now it wasn't just a voice. It was multiple voices, a chorus of faint murmurs that seemed to swirl around me, just out of reach. The words were unintelligible, foreign in a way that sent chills up my spine. The figures in the shadows seemed to draw closer, but they never fully materialized. They were always just out of reach, like phantoms from another realm. I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread deep within me. "Leave," one of the voices finally whispered, so close I felt it on my skin. "Leave now, before it's too late." I stumbled backward, heart racing, desperate to escape. But the ground beneath me shifted once more, this time with more force, making it impossible to keep my footing. I fell to the ground, my hands scraping against the earth as I tried to catch myself. The moment I hit the dirt, everything went quiet again, unnervingly still. I pushed myself to my feet, my body trembling from the sudden fear that gripped me. The orb was gone, but the shadows remained, flickering in the corners of my vision. I turned to look around, but everything was different now. The forest was no longer a place I recognized. The trees towered above me like monstrous giants, their gnarled limbs twisting together to form an impenetrable wall. There was no clear path, no sign of the way I had come. It felt as though I was in a place that wasn't meant to exist, a place where the rules of the natural world no longer applied. And yet, there was no way out. The whispers continued, their voices growing more insistent, more demanding. Something wanted me to stay, to listen, but I couldn't afford to. With one last look at the shifting shadows, I turned and bolted in the opposite direction, unsure of where I was going, but certain that staying here was not an option. I ran without thinking, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees pressing in from every side as I darted through the undergrowth. My feet tripped over roots, my hands scraped against rough bark, but I couldn't slow down. The whispers were still there, growing louder as though the voices were chasing me. Every step I took felt like I was sinking deeper into a nightmare, and I was desperate to escape, to find my way back to the safety of the world I knew. Suddenly, I skidded to a halt. Ahead of me, the path opened up, leading to a clearing. I could see the sky, pale and gray, peeking through the canopy above. The light seemed strangely distant, as though I were looking at it from far away. But there was something in the clearing, something I hadn't noticed before. At the center, there was a large stone altar, weathered and covered in moss. It stood there, as if waiting, an ancient monument to some forgotten purpose. I approached cautiously, my every instinct screaming at me to turn around and run, but I couldn't look away. The altar seemed to call to me, drawing me in. As I stepped closer, I saw something etched into the stone, symbols that seemed to shift and change with each blink of my eyes. They were like nothing I had ever seen, their meaning eluding me, yet somehow they felt familiar, as though I had encountered them in a dream long ago. The whispering had stopped, but the air around me was thick with tension. I could feel something, a presence, watching from the shadows. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I reached out, my fingers grazing the surface of the stone, and in that instant, I felt a sharp jolt of electricity shoot through my body. It was as if the ground beneath me had suddenly come alive, pulsing with energy. My vision blurred, and I staggered backward, shaking my head to clear the dizzying sensation. But then, I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the altar. It was tall, shadowed, and indistinct, yet there was something unnervingly human about it. The figure moved, and I instinctively took a step back, but my foot caught on a loose stone, sending me crashing to the ground. I looked up, expecting the figure to be gone, but it was still there, closer now. The voice returned, low and guttural, its words impossible to decipher. I felt a weight pressing down on me, as though the very air around me had turned to lead. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The figure stepped forward, and with each step, the ground seemed to tremble beneath my feet. "Stay!" the voice commanded, its tone harsh and cold. "You belong here." I struggled to rise, but my limbs felt like they were made of stone, as if some invisible force was holding me down. I couldn't understand what was happening, couldn't grasp the reality of the situation, but the figure was now directly in front of me, its shadow towering over me like an unholy specter. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The world had gone silent once more. Then, with one final movement, the figure reached out and touched my forehead, and everything went black. When I opened my eyes again, I was no longer in the forest. The clearing, the altar, the mysterious figure, they were all gone. I was lying in the middle of a dense thicket, the forest still around me, but it felt different. The trees stood still, as if frozen in time, their branches unmoving in the windless air. The whispers were gone, and the heavy feeling that had weighed on me was no longer there. Everything felt eerily calm. I pushed myself up from the ground, my body aching as if I had been through something far more intense than I could comprehend. My head was spinning, and for a moment I wasn't sure where I was or how I had gotten there. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the forest floor. I looked around, trying to gather my bearings, but it was as if time had shifted in some unexplainable way. I stumbled forward, trying to retrace my steps, but nothing seemed familiar. The forest, once so vibrant and alive, now seemed distant, foreign. The trees I had passed earlier were no longer there, replaced by unfamiliar shapes and angles. I had no idea where I was, how far I had wandered, or how long it had been since I had collapsed in that strange clearing. A growing sense of panic began to creep over me. The events from earlier, my encounter with the figure, the electric shock, the overwhelming feeling of being pulled into something otherworldly, were becoming harder to grasp, like fragments of a dream slipping through my fingers. I thought I had seen something that didn't belong in this world. The figure, its voice, the symbols on the altar. Had it all been real? I shook my head, trying to clear the fog in my mind. I had to get out of there. I needed to find a way back home, back to safety. My survival instincts kicked in, and I forced myself to focus on the immediate task at hand, getting out of the woods. As I pushed through the dense underbrush, I finally began to see signs of familiar landmarks, small trails, a faint clearing up ahead. My heart lifted with hope. I was getting closer to the edge of the woods, back to civilization. But then, I saw something that froze me in my tracks. At the edge of the clearing stood the same stone altar, the one I had encountered earlier. It was impossible. I had been moving in the opposite direction, and there was no way I could have crossed back to the same spot so quickly. My breath caught in my throat, and panic surged through me once more. I took a step forward, my body tense, my mind racing. As I approached the altar, I noticed something new. An item resting on the stone surface, a small, weathered book. It looked ancient, its pages yellowed and worn. Without thinking, I reached out and picked it up. The moment my fingers brushed the cover, a rush of coldness ran through me, and the whispers returned, faint but undeniable. The book opened to a page, the ink faded but legible. I read the words aloud without meaning to. "The forest has claimed you. There is no escape." And just like that, I knew. Whatever had happened in those woods, whatever that thing was that I had encountered, was not over. The forest had changed me, and now, it wanted something in return.